I want to direct your attention to the last words of three young men. I think there's a lesson for us about how to finish and how to stand. Go to Daniel, the 3rd chapter. Daniel's my favorite book of the Bible. I like that book so much that I named my daughter Danielle. And though you couldn't see the spelling of it, Elder could. Her name is spelled exactly like Daniel, except change the I to a Y, because I like Daniel. So we just changed the I to a Y. Daniel chapter 3, one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. And you know the story. I want us to pick up in the story at verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the image, the golden image that you've set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound, I'm not going to go through all the music again. When you hear the sound of all of that, if you fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And then catch this last phrase. This is significant. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? That's the question. What God can deliver you out of my hands? Here's their response. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego respond and say to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer you in this matter. In other words, we're not scared. We ain't scared. If this is the case, our God whom we serve is able. Somebody say he's able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And catch these words, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. The three Hebrew boys were presented with a challenge. Their challenge was, are you going to remain faithful to God? Are you going to stand up for the God that you believe in, even in the face of death? And the Bible tells us that these three boys, though this would be their end, at least Nebuchadnezzar thought so, this would be their last words, yet the Bible tells us that they said a few words before they were thrown in. Their message to Nebuchadnezzar, first of all, was, we are not scared of you. Now, I want you to understand there is nothing wrong with when you are faced with a challenge like they were, to have a level of anxiety. That is natural. Are you with me? I would be surprised if we could go back in time and measure their heartbeat and not find that their heart might have began to beat just a little bit faster. I would imagine there was slight fear and anxiety. What they were saying is not that we have no fear, but what they were saying is that we have a greater confidence in the God we serve than we have fear in the threat that you've made. James Hollingsworth says courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Young people and older people alike, we need to have it in our minds that there is something more important than all that this world has to offer. Yes, the world might have some things that seem good, but God has something that is even greater. And when we understand what is greater and what is more important, then no matter what threat comes, we can stand up for God because we have something else that is more important than the things of this world. My Bible tells me in Revelation chapter 13 that there's coming a time, people, and trust me, this time is not far away. We still believe as Seventh-day Adventists that at the end of time there's going to be a challenge, and it will center around worship just as it did for Daniel, for the three Hebrew boys. And when they were tested on worship, they were able to stand up for God because they had something more important than the fear of death. I have often spoken to the young people at my church, and when I speak at like graduations and stuff, I like to remind people that, you know, the way to become great, you have to cultivate greatness before the moment, not in the moment. I remember reading the story. I don't know how many basketball fans are in here. I'm a basketball fan. And I remember, you know, nowadays I think basketball is, I don't know, I know I'm not that old, but it doesn't seem as exciting as it used to be for me. In the days of Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Reggie Miller, you know, basketball was so exciting to me. You know, it was almost poetic watching Michael Jordan slice a defense. But I remember reading a story about Larry Bird, for example. You know, Larry Bird, one of the greatest shooters to have ever touched a basketball in the NBA. And Larry Bird, when he was in high school, before he would go to school at 8 in the morning, before he went to school at 8, which means he must have started maybe at 7 or something. I don't know. But his daddy made him shoot 1,000 free throws every day. Yes. So it makes sense to me when I look at Larry Bird's statistics and find out that he's one of the greatest free throw shooters to have ever played the game. It wasn't because when he stepped on the court, he got some magical ability to shoot free throws. Larry Bird was simply doing what he had been doing all of his life. When you look at Michael Jordan soar through the air and shoot over defenders' hands and watch him as he dribbles and dunks and all the rest that he did, Michael Jordan practiced basketball for 8 hours every single day. Yeah. Because in order to be great, you don't step on the court and become great. You practice to be great. A study was done some years ago, and it was found out that it does not take a genius, you know, to be these great musicians that you see. You think of people like Mozart and all of that, and people think, oh, he was a genius. No, they found out that in order for someone to be that proficient, all it requires is 10,000 hours of practice. 10,000 hours. They've set a number to it. If you practice something for 10,000 hours, you will have perfected your craft, and people will call you a genius when really all it was you practiced more than everybody else. The three Hebrew boys, though they were teenagers when they were abducted and taken into captivity, the Bible seems to indicate that the three Hebrew boys were not just men of the moment, but they had practiced their faith. How do we know this? Because when you go back to Daniel chapter 1, we find out that they were willing to stand up for what they believed in with regards to what they ate. It wasn't a big deal, but it was something that caused them to stand up for God. So when we get to chapter 2 and there's a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, they already have confidence that God is able. And then when we come to chapter 3, they have already tested God. They have already tried him and found God to be able. So even though they are challenged by Nebuchadnezzar and they might have a little anxiety, they said, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not worried because our God is able. Oh, somebody in here knows God is able. Oh, somebody in here knows that God is able. Yeah, I think somebody in here might have been to their last dollar or maybe to your last nickel. You didn't even have 2 nickels to rub together. And yet when you thought all hope was gone, you looked in the mailbox and there was a check just for what you needed. Somebody knows God is able. Oh, I know somebody in here was sick. Somebody in here was sick and the devil lied to you and told you that you were at the end of the rope. The doctors didn't know any better. They were doing their job. They did their test, and the test came back and told them to tell you that you're about to go. Put your house in order. But somebody in here knows that God is able. And when you went down on your knees, you didn't call out to your family or friends or neighbors, but you called on the name of Jesus. And next thing you know, the doctors came and said, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened, but the tests say that what you had, you no longer have. Somebody in here knows that God is able. Maybe you had a loved one or friend that you were praying for, praying about a child who was lost. They had strayed from the path that they should have been walking. Or maybe you are that person. And your mama or grandmama or daddy or granddaddy was praying for you. And they thought, well, we believe God is able. We sure hope the Lord will hurry up and work in their life. And they prayed and prayed, or you prayed and prayed. And before long, you looked up one day and saw that loved one, or maybe you were that loved one sitting in church. God is able. The 3 Hebrew boys were faced with a challenge. They were at the end of their rope. The king thought they were at the end of their life. This was going to be it. But the first thing we learn is that though you might have some fear, there has to be something inside you that is greater than that fear so that you're able to stand up for God. Second thing we learn is that you don't get that on the spot. You get that by cultivating it. You better practice it before the challenge comes. You know, that's why the little things are so important. Little things are so important. If you look at, and I'm a big sports fan, not just basketball. I like football and baseball and you name it. I've played it. I watch it. I'm a sports fan. But in sports, one thing that is important, and I've played on basketball teams and so forth, one thing that's very important is you must pay attention to the details. The great teams are not the team that just has the most talented people. Prime example, look at the San Diego Chargers. Talented team, but they can never win. Why? Because it's the little things. The little things. You have to pay attention to the little things. And in our spiritual life, if you do not pay attention to the little things, if you just dismiss them as if they're unimportant, it doesn't matter, nobody's watching, then when the big challenge comes, you will fall because you have not been practicing. But then we also learn from these 3 Hebrew boys, they had an absolute confidence in God. Their last three words, three of their last words remind us that they believe that God is able. Their statement was a statement of confidence in God. There was no hint of unbelief in what God was able to do. They said, our God is able. But I'd like to direct us to three other words that they said. And these three words are also significant. And I hope that we get the message from the three Hebrew boys. They not only said our God is able, but they said he will deliver. Yeah, you probably thought I was going to say, but if not, huh? Yeah, I'm sure you've heard a preacher talk about, but if not. If you just give me just a moment, can I do a little teaching and then I'll close out? Can I do that? Give me just a little moment. I want to show you something that God showed me as I looked very closely at this text. You know, whenever you read the Bible, you need to study the context. All right? Don't just go with what you might have heard somebody say. Go with the context, because the context will teach you a whole lot about the Bible. I want to show you something about this phrase, but if not, and then we're going to close out. All right? The three Hebrew boys, verse 16 and on, it says that they respond to the king and say, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. If it is so, our God..." Now, what is the "if it is so"? Do you know what that's referring to? If you are going to throw us into the fiery furnace. See? That's what that phrase is referring to. If you're going to throw us into the fiery furnace. If it is so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Now, look at the next phrase. But if not, what is the "but if not" referring to? Now, there's three options. Let me give you three options. Like I said, give me a moment to teach here. I'm going to give you three options, all right? There's three things that scholars have found that this phrase could be referring to. One of them doesn't make any sense, so we're going to rule it out quickly, and that is they could be saying, but if God is not able. We know that that's not what the three Hebrew boys were saying, because the three Hebrew boys were clear. Our God is able. Our God is able. So the scholars say, well, it could be, but if he's not able, then we still won't serve your God. So we rule that one out. The second option is the one that is the most popular one, but I'm going to suggest to you that I believe it is wrong. And that is that if he does not deliver us. All right. Most people say, but if not, is the three Hebrew boys are saying our God is able. He will deliver us. But if he chooses not to deliver us, then we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. Is that what you've probably heard people say? Now, let me show you why I believe that that's not what they're saying. First of all, the challenge of Nebuchadnezzar is what? He says, if you don't worship this image, I'm going to throw you in the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who is able to deliver you? His challenge is that God is not able to deliver them. The three Hebrew boys counter that and say, listen, our God is able and he's going to do it. All right? Now, if they believe that the challenge is with God delivering them, why would they say, but if he doesn't deliver us? Second reason why I challenge that traditional view. Notice what they say afterward. They say, but if not, we're still not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image you've set up. That would be a foolish statement to say if God doesn't deliver them, because of course they're not going to worship or serve the gods. They'll be dead. See, they say our God is able. He's going to deliver us. But if he doesn't deliver us, we're not going to serve your gods. Of course you're not. You'll be dead. In fact, that wouldn't even be an impressive statement. There's nothing impressive about that. If God doesn't deliver you, then Nebuchadnezzar has won. If your God doesn't deliver you, then Nebuchadnezzar is correct in saying what God can deliver you out of my hand. The only response that would make sense to the challenge of Nebuchadnezzar is this: if it be so, verse 17, that is, if you choose to throw us into the fire, our God is able and he will deliver us. But if you choose not to throw us into the fire, if you choose not to throw us into the fire, then we still will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you set up. In other words, to your challenge, Nebuchadnezzar, the ball is in your court. We have already made up our mind. Our mind is set. We're determined that whether you throw us in or not, we're not serving your gods. We're not going to bow down and worship them. If you choose to throw us in, you thought that you won. You thought you were victorious, but the God we serve is going to deliver us. And if you don't want to throw us in, we're still going to stand up for our God, because our God is able and our God is a deliverer. Oh, I wish somebody in here knew that God is a deliverer. Somebody in here know that when you are standing up for what is right, no matter how bleak it may seem, God will deliver. Listen. Why is that important? Here's why. The last words of the three Hebrew boys were intended to express an important point for all of history about God's deliverance. And I think it could be expressed, it's expressed very well by a man named William Cullen Bryant. He says it like this. He says, truth crushed to the earth will rise again. Dr. King loved to make the comparison. He says the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In other words, the message, the point that those men and the three Hebrew boys were trying to make is that when you stand up for what is right, even if it looks bleak at the moment, even if it looks like you're about to get thrown into a fiery furnace or a den of lions, when you stand up for what is right, God will deliver. It may not look like it right now, but if you just wait a while, God will deliver. The one who stands up for Jesus will never be disappointed, because God will deliver. Darkness may seem to win. It may seem dark at moments. It may seem like the enemy has been victorious when you see the death and sickness and suffering and devastation that's happening on this planet. But I have good news for you. My Bible tells me later in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, beginning at that first verse, it says that Michael shall stand up. Oh yeah, the enemy may look like he's winning. It may look like he's victorious. But one day soon, Michael shall stand up. And when Jesus stands up, the enemy who thought he was victorious will fall down. One day Michael is going to stand up. But Michael is standing up. I'm closing now. Michael is standing up for those who were willing to stand up for him. You see, Jesus said that anyone who is ashamed of me before men, see, I can't stand up for them before my Father. You have to be willing to stand up for Jesus before men, and then Jesus will stand up for you. When I was much younger, well, actually, this has been a problem all my life, but when I was much younger, it was much worse. When I played sports, I had this bad habit of what we call talking junk or talking smack. Now, as you can see, I'm not that big. Yeah, I'm not that big. In fact, when I went to Pine Forge, I was even smaller. I was 5'1". I was about 125 pounds. And I was also the youngest person in my class. I went at 13 years old. So I was in ninth grade, 13 years old, went away from home. I've always been small. But my size was not comparative to my mouth. I may not be that big, but I had a lot of bark. And I remember one day I was at the basketball court playing basketball. And I was always taught that the mind, if you can get in somebody's head, that's half the game. You don't even have to be a good basketball player. If you can just distract someone enough to get them off their game, you halfway beat them. So I made sure I always talked. Always. I talked the entire game. You dribbling, I'm talking. I'm standing there defending you, I'm talking. The whole game. And I was doing that one day. I was talking to this guy who I was defending, and he was a football player who was just deciding to play basketball this day. And I was 13 and he was 17. Yeah, he was 17, football player. And he was a nice guy, I must admit, because, I think most people wouldn't have had the patience to deal with half of what he dealt with me. But I'm defending him and I'm talking. And after a while, he got tired of all of my talking. And he was ready to stop talking and to handle it in a more physical, hands-on approach. Now, I am no fool. And I always know how much talking I can do. And the same way I can get into trouble with my mouth, I also can talk my way out of it. Yeah. What this young man didn't realize was the reason I could talk so much that day and had so much mouth and so much confidence was because I wasn't there by myself. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're trying to figure out where is he going with the story. I wasn't there by myself. See, I went to the court, but I went there with my older brother. I went there with my older brother, and my older brother, he was 17 at the time as well. And so because I wasn't there by myself, I wasn't as worried. He was there by himself. And so when he thought, well, let's handle this in a more hands-on approach, and he started to come towards me, my brother stepped in. And when my brother stepped in, I then, poked the chest out a little bit more. Because I knew that he wasn't going to attack the two of us. I had my brother with me. Listen, God has called on his people to stand up for him. And even when things seem like they're going to go horribly wrong, even when you think that people are going to mistreat you or abuse you or do something to you, listen, you have an older brother. And his name is Jesus. And Jesus, your older brother, has made a promise to you. My Bible tells me that Jesus has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. My Bible tells me when I look into the story of Daniel, it doesn't say it, but in my mind, I can envision that when Daniel got thrown into the lion's den, Jesus had gone on before him into the den and said to the lions, this is not going to be your dinner tonight. But when we look in Daniel 3, the Bible does tell us about where Jesus was. Nebuchadnezzar took those 3 Hebrew boys and he said, listen, if you're not going to bow, I'm going to throw you in the fire. They said, our God is able and he's going to deliver us. Nebuchadnezzar said, oh yeah. And he took the 3 Hebrew boys. He told his strongest men to take them, bind them, and toss them into the fire. You know what I find interesting in that story? The Bible tells us that the men who threw them in got burned. Now, I'm no fool, but if I was one of the guards, stand up for me, please. If I was one of the guards and this is the fiery furnace, I don't think I would throw you in like this if the fire's here. I think I would throw you in like this. You can go. But the Bible tells us that, I don't know how it happened, but it seems that maybe Jesus directed the flames and told them to jump over the 3 Hebrew boys and to catch on to the guards. And the guards caught fire and died. But the 3 Hebrew boys were saved. The fire was so hot it burned them instantly. But the 3 Hebrew boys didn't even smell like smoke. And then they get into the fire, and Jesus again directs the flames, because he directs the flames to the ropes on their hands and feet. But it doesn't burn their clothes. And then after directing the fire, the Bible tells us that Nebuchadnezzar looks inside the furnace. And when he looks inside the furnace, he says, wait a minute, I thought we threw 3 people in. I see a 4th person in there. Nebuchadnezzar didn't realize that Jesus, our older brother, will never leave us nor forsake us. Jesus was in the fire with them. The reason that you never need to fear is because no matter what you face, Jesus not only will help you, but Jesus will be there with you. Today I'd like to appeal to somebody. I don't know whom I'm appealing to, because I don't know most of the people in this church. I do know a couple of you, but I don't know most of you in this church. And I don't ever take it for granted whenever I go to a church that everybody is saved, sanctified, Holy Ghost filled. I don't take that for granted. Somebody might be in here and they've just been going through the motions. If you're just going through the motions, if you're just associating with spiritual things, but you're not actually practicing them, the devil will reveal that. There will be a test, and it will be evident that you are a faker. Today, someone needs to make a decision, a commitment to stand up for Jesus. Today, someone needs to stand for Jesus. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the second time, maybe you're recommitting your life because you stood for Jesus but you fell away. I don't know, but someone needs to stand for Jesus. Listen, if you were worried to be the first, well, you're not the first. So now you can take your stand. Someone needs to have the courage to stand up for Jesus Christ today. This isn't about denominationalism. I'm not saying stand up because you want to be a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm saying, listen, Jesus Christ said, if you will stand up for me in front of men, I'll stand up for you. So today, if you have been faking it, or maybe you never said you made a commitment, but today you want to take a stand for Jesus, I invite you to stand where you are. Stand where you are. Just stand where you are. Today you want to commit your life to following him. Stand where you are. Stand where you are. Now listen, I'm going to challenge you to take an even greater step for Jesus Christ. You see that elders are standing in the front. They want to pray with you and pray for you. I want to challenge you to take a greater step. Show that you are committed by making your way down front right now. Right now. Those of you who are standing, you're committing your life to Jesus. I invite you to make your way down front right now. The elders are standing here. They will pray with you and pray for you. I invite you to make your way down front. Yes, yes. You can sing along, sing the song. Him and his word just